Most people think skinwalkers are just stories, until they see one. These are 3 encounters from people who didn't believe, until it was standing right in front of them. This happened in the summer of 2019, somewhere in the Sonoran Desert, in southern Arizona. I want to be upfront about something before I get into this. I'm not the kind of person who believes in things they can't explain. I'm an engineer. I spent 15 years solving problems with logic and data. So when I tell you that what happened out there changed something in me permanently, I need you to understand that I don't say that lightly. I was on a solo photography trip. I'd been doing these trips every few months for about 4 years at that point, driving out to remote parts of the desert, camping for a night or two, shooting landscapes at golden hour and again at sunrise. It was my way of disconnecting. No phone signal, no emails, no noise. Just the desert and my camera. The area I'd chosen this particular weekend was way off the beaten path. The nearest town was about 40 minutes by dirt road, and the campsite I used wasn't on any map I'd found online. A coworker had told me about it years before. He said his family used to go out there when he was a kid, and that the sunsets were unlike anything he'd ever seen anywhere else. He wasn't wrong. I set up camp around 4 in the afternoon, got my tent pitched, started a small fire, made some food, and just sat there watching the light change over the desert floor. The colors that evening were incredible. Deep oranges bleeding into purple and red along the ridgeline to the west. I was out there with my camera for about 2 hours shooting before it got too dark to see clearly. That was when I noticed the silence. Now I know the desert is quiet. That's part of why I loved it. But this was different. There's usually something out there at dusk. Insects, wind moving through the brush, distant birds. That evening, there was absolutely nothing. The kind of quiet that feels less like the absence of sound and more like something pressing down on you. I packed up my camera and started walking back toward camp. The fire was still going about a quarter mile away, and I could see the glow of it through the scrub brush. I wasn't nervous yet, just aware. About halfway back, I stopped walking. On the ridge directly to my right, maybe 200 yards out, something was standing completely still against the darkening sky. My first thought was that it was a person. The silhouette had that upright quality to it, but there was something wrong with the proportions. The legs were too long, the torso too short, and the head, it was angled slightly down and to the side in a way that made it look like it was watching me specifically. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at it, telling myself it was a cactus, a strange rock formation, something I was misreading in the low light. But it didn't hold up. Whatever it was, it had a shape that was unmistakably biological. You could see joints in the limbs, a defined neck and head, and then it moved. Not quickly. It took one slow, deliberate step forward, then stopped. Like it wanted me to see it. Like it was choosing to reveal itself. I turned and walked back to camp at a pace that I will honestly describe as just barely not running. I'm not proud of it, but I also don't think I was wrong to be afraid. I stoked the fire as high as I could get it, sat with my back to the largest rock I could find, and stayed awake the entire night. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They circled the camp once and then stopped. I never saw anything, but I could hear the weight of whatever it was pressing into the dry ground. I broke camp at first light and drove straight out without looking back. Didn't stop until I hit the highway. I've been back to the desert since then, but I've never been back to that spot. A few months after the trip, I started reading about skinwalker encounters in the Southwest, and found descriptions that matched what I saw on that ridge almost word for word. The wrong proportions, the deliberate stillness, the feeling of being watched by something that knew exactly what it was doing. I haven't found another explanation that fits, and I've tried.
I grew up on the Navajo Nation in northern New Mexico. I want to say that up front because I think it matters. These stories weren't folklore to me growing up. They were warnings. The adults in my family didn't tell us about skinwalkers to scare us. They told us so we would know how to behave and what to do if something ever happened. You don't talk about them by name after dark. You don't go outside alone late at night. And if you ever see something you can't explain, you don't look at it directly. You look away and you leave. I say all of this because the night it happened to me, I broke every single one of those rules. I was 23. I'd been living in Albuquerque for 2 years by then, working a restaurant job and going to community college part-time. I came back home for a family gathering that summer and stayed for about a week. My grandmother's house sat at the end of a long dirt road about 6 miles from the nearest paved road. Out there, the sky at night is so dark and so full of stars that it almost doesn't look real. On the third night of my visit, I couldn't sleep. It was past midnight and the house was quiet. I stepped outside to get some air and just stood on the porch for a while looking out at the desert. The moon was about half full that night, bright enough to cast faint shadows across the ground. I was about to go back inside when I noticed something moving down the dirt road. At first, I thought it was a dog. It was low to the ground and moving at a trot, coming in the direction of the house from about a quarter mile away. We had neighbors who let their dogs roam, and it wasn't unusual to see them wander past at odd hours. I leaned against the porch railing and watched it come closer. But the closer it got, the less it looked like a tung. The movement was wrong. Dogs have a kind of loose, easy rhythm when they run. This thing moved with a stiffness that was unsettling, and it was large, much larger than any dog I'd ever seen out here. As it got within maybe 100 yards, I could see that it was moving on all fours, but the way its joints articulated wasn't right. My grandmother's voice came into my head right then, very clearly, like she was standing next to me whispering, "Don't look at it directly. Look away and go inside." I did not listen. I kept watching as it slowed to a walk, still on the road, now maybe 70 yards out, and then it stopped, completely still, facing the house. Facing me even at that distance, and in that low light, I could see that it was looking at me. Not in the way an animal looks at you with curiosity or fear, in the way that something looks at you when it already knows exactly who you are. A sound came out of it then, not a growl, not a howl. It was something in between, low and ragged, with a quality to it that made my chest tighten in a way I still can't fully describe. It wasn't a sound an animal should be able to make. I backed up to the door and went inside. I didn't run. I was too scared to run. I locked the door behind me and sat down on the floor with my back against it and stayed there until sunrise. I told my grandmother what I saw in the morning. She didn't say much. She made me tea, and she sat with me for a long time, and eventually she said that some things come around when there's been a disruption in a family. Something unresolved. She didn't say anything more than that, and I didn't ask her to. I moved back home a year later. Not because of what happened that night, but it was part of it. Some places ask something of you, and it takes seeing something on a dark road to understand what that means. I've only told this story a handful of times. Most people hear the word skinwalker, and they think of something from a movie or a podcast. They don't understand that for a lot of people, this isn't a scary story, something that's still part of you years later, whether you want it to be or not.
This is my account and my brother's account of what happened in southeastern Utah in the fall of 2021. I want to include him in this because we were both there, and we both saw the same thing on 2 separate occasions that night. I've talked to him about it many times since, and his memory matches mine exactly. That matters to me because I've spent a lot of time wondering if I just scared myself in the dark. Having another witness doesn't make what we saw less strange, but it makes it harder to dismiss. My brother and I had been camping together since we were teenagers. We're both in our 30s now, and we try to get out at least twice a year for a trip. That October, we drove out to a remote stretch of canyon country in Utah, a spot we'd never been to before that a friend had recommended. Red Rock Country. Massive formations rising up out of the flat desert floor. Narrow slot canyons, dry washes cutting through the sand. Incredible terrain. We set up camp on the first evening without any issues. Made dinner, sat by the fire, talked until late. The only unusual thing I noticed that first night was that it felt too quiet. My brother mentioned it too before we turned in. Neither of us made much of it at the time. The second night is where things changed. We'd been out hiking most of the day and were tired by the time we got back to camp. After dinner, my brother went to his tent around 10. I stayed up a little longer reading by the fire. At some point just past 11, I started feeling uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain. Not afraid exactly, just deeply uneasy. The feeling you get when you can't tell if you're being watched, but your body thinks you are. I scanned the campsite and the surrounding area. Nothing. I turned in about 20 minutes later. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, my brother unzipped my tent and shook me awake. He was whispering, and his voice was tight in the way that people's voices get when they're trying very hard to stay calm. He told me to come outside and to be quiet. I followed him out. He pointed to the far edge of the dry wash about 60 or 70 yards from camp. There was a figure standing in the wash. It was upright, tall, taller than a person should be, with a long neck and a head that seemed slightly too large for its body. It was standing completely still, no movement at all, looking in the direction of our campsite. We stood there watching it for what felt like 3 or 4 minutes. It was probably closer to 1. The fire had burned down to coals, so there wasn't much light, but the moon was bright enough to see the outline of the figure clearly against the pale canyon walls behind it. Then my brother grabbed my arm. It moved. In the time it took him to grab my arm, and for my eyes to snap back to where the figure had been, it had covered maybe 30 feet in what seemed like no time at all. Just closer. We went back into my tent and sat there together until morning. At one point during the night, we heard something moving slowly around the outside of the tent, the sound of feet on dry sand, deliberate, hurried. Whatever it was, knew we were inside and wasn't in any rush. It went quiet after about 15 minutes and didn't come back. We broke camp at dawn without speaking much. On the drive out, my brother was the first one to say what we'd both been thinking. He said that nothing he'd ever seen explained what was standing in that wash. Not a person, not an animal, not anything he had a name for. Looked into it later separately, and both landed in the same place. We'd never heard of skinwalkers before that trip. We'd never had any reason to. The more we read, the more it fit. Unnatural proportions. Stillness. The way it moved without seeming to move. The circling. We haven't been back to that part of Utah. We still go camping together. But we talk about it every time we go out, quietly and briefly, in the way you talk about something you haven't fully made peace with. Like a door you closed but aren't sure you locked. Some things out in the desert don't have easy explanations. And I think the honest thing to say is that after what we saw that night, I'm not sure I'd want one anymore.